Into each generation, a moral panic about the sexualization of young girls is born, and maybe you either die young enough to still believe that 11-year-olds pole dancing will save us, or live long enough to become a hand-wringing reactionary who threatens violence against Britney Spears. But either way, it's a pretty well-worn path, and it's a conversation I've been avoiding since it was brought back into the mainstream by the release of a certain teeny tiny pop star's album later this summer. And I find the conversation around this online to be very frustrating. It's super black and white. You're either a prude or an anti-feminist, and it's the same discourse we've been engaging in since the 1970s, only this time puppeted by Island Records, so no thanks. And for that reason, I won't be approaching this from the angle of lauding or despairing of one particular pop girly. I actually like Sabrina Carpenter's music, I wish her well. And this video isn't about her, it's actually about a different girl that I've been thinking about a lot recently, whose name is Dolores Hayes, or as she's more commonly known, Lolita. Lolita, Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel of the same name, which was also made into its best-known film adaptation in 1997, seems to only deepen its grip on Western pop culture. Comes back time and time again, referenced whether we realise it or not. Trends echo her iconic film portrayal, where heart-shaped sunglasses and lollipops became synonymous with a youthful sexuality and girls who are supposedly worldly beyond their years. Most of you will know, but if you don't, the book is told from the perspective of her mid-30s stepfather Humbert, who falls in love with her, starts a relationship with her, abuses her, and then they, spoiler, both die at the end. She's 12. I think at the end of the book she is 17. In the 1997 film, she pops bubblegum, wears heart-shaped sunglasses, has her hair in bunches, and if all of this sounds familiar, even though you haven't seen the film, that's because it's become sort of the cultural blueprint for a vulnerable woman girl who uses her attractiveness to manipulate men in basically every movie that uses that trope since. Lolita figure gets to be the ultimate contradiction. She's sexy enough to be in control, but innocent enough to not really know it and still needs saving. And the iconography around this is frequently taken on by pop stars to denote their own youth and their own accidental irresistibleness. So one example of this in the 2010s was Katy Perry. Now, Katy Perry spoke openly about how Lolita was her blueprint, how she studied it, was obsessed with it, and wanted to emulate her in her own image. You can see it in the heart-shaped sunglasses, the wide-eyed faux naivety. She's playing around with the idea of a more childlike sexuality, or a girl who knows more than she's letting on. Which is part of the whole crux of how Lolita has ended up being interpreted. This idea that it's actually the young woman who, despite her seeming innocence and childlike nature, actually is completely in control of the men around her and knows what she's doing. We've also got Lana Del Rey in the 2010s, who was interpreting Lolita's image to convey her own vulnerability, her relationships with older men, and how she actually described herself on, I think, Born to Die as Gangster Nancy Sinatra or Lolita lost in the hood, which is a hell of a sentence. I think also shows how Lolita is so baked into pop culture. People knew what she meant by that. Now, these evocative images do the job. They're a cultural shorthand for youthful allure. Allure? Of course, the people making the references were adults, so it's edgy enough to drive interest, but divorced enough from the source material to be culturally acceptable. They're not pretending to be 12. They're using Lolita imagery and wordplay to convey a certain type of girl who is sexy, but vulnerable, playful, youthful, childlike. I think if a femme fatale is the trope of a woman who is using her sexuality to control men, Lolita is maybe her younger sister, so sexy, capable of causing obsession and being manipulative, but her power is muted by her youth. She still needs help and guidance. She's a girl, and the girlishness of her image decreases the threat of it, which is maybe what makes it more desirable to a lot of people. Sometimes Lolita is referenced in a way that seems to be attempting to subvert it. Harley Quinn, for example, especially in the Suicide Squad movies with her pigtails, lollipop, baby voice, is maybe another quintessential Lolita reference. The difference, I suppose, maybe, is that if you underestimate her based on this girlishness, she also has a baseball bat and kind of superpowers. I think sometimes filmmakers or writers are trying to contrast these two things and make us question our assumptions about someone who's girly or childish. But it is worth noting they also cast Margot Robbie, so we are definitely still supposed to interpret this as sexy. And if you look at all the media that went on around this film, people did find it sexy. Birds of Prey, the follow-up sequel, which I have actually not seen but was produced by Margot Robbie and directed by Kathy Yan, so two women, notably makes the choice to not have Harley Quinn wear a little top that says Daddy's Little Monster, and her image seems less catered to a male gaze in that film. She's not sucking a lollipop, and just that honestly really shifts the tone of all the promo material. Maybe that's the difference between a project written by a man versus written by a woman, so an anti-hero with powers doesn't have to be given a sexy baby personality in order to make her more likeable. This isn't new. We've been dressing up adult women in the guise of young girls for a really long time. But before, I think we could have dismissed this as, oh, it's classic male gaze, it's what men want to see. But I think increasingly a lot of this is driven by women. At least a Lolita-fied version of girlish sexuality is really being embraced by a lot of young women. It makes me think of the coquette micro-trend, which hit the internet hard last year, which also evokes Lolita in its lace, rustles, puff sleeves, ribbons and pale pink. All of this encased inside a name that means a woman who flirts. These signifiers of girlhood and girlishness, small details that suggest a child's clothing, are named for their flirtatiousness. Of course, it's not wrong to dress sexy or to flirt, but I'm fascinated by the ongoing link between being childlike and being sexy. Because I think being sexy is as important to this trend as being childlike is. You know, we're not slinging on dungarees and Crocs in an attempt to invoke youth. And yes, I am saying that people would find that less sexy, so sorry to all the bisexuals watching this video. It doesn't seem to be seeking an escape into an unsexualized version of childhood, but rather a sexuality that instead relies on childish imagery. And it was Sabrina Carpenter's upcoming album, Man's Best Friend, that got a lot of this spinning around in my head. The front cover has generated a lot of conversation, but that aside, it was actually the back cover that really caught my eye. The back of the album sees Sabrina reclined on a bed, her feet being massaged by a man with grey in his hair, so unless he is just a very stressed 25-year-old, we can assume he is older. Put these two images side by side, then also combined with this third one from the other film, put these three images side by side. To me, there is a clear through line. This is actually the second time where, knowingly or not, Sabrina has been involved in a reference to Lolita. Last year, a photo shoot saw her styled under a sprinkler, soaking wet, lying on the grass. A recreation of How We Meet Lolita in the 1997 film. This is a very famous scene. She has said that she's not seen the film or read the book, and I believe her, although I do think she missed a huge opportunity to say, Lolita, I hardly know her. But let's be real, someone on her team has seen the film. And doesn't this just show how ingrained in our culture this imagery is? It's a visual shorthand for a girl who has managed to become sexy, crucial, without having to become a woman. Awful. And speaking of not reading the book, I do just want to take a minute to acknowledge how different the character in the book is from what's become the image of Lolita in their cultural mainstream. In the book, Lolita is described by our narrator, who we are both meant to be sympathetic towards and repulsed by, as very much a child. 4'11" in one sock, she's a monkey, she picks her nose, she's 12 years old. Yes, our protagonist talks about how she's not really a child anymore, but she very much has all the urchin-like features of childhood. Her childishness is what draws the protagonist to her. Now, the film has to visually convey this journey that the book takes us on through poetic writing, and it chooses to do this by basically making Lolita a lot more conventionally attractive. Maybe the film wants us to question our own reactions to this young girl. Maybe it wants to sanitize the horror of the book to be able to make a movie version of it. And it's worth knowing that the composer and the director discussed their vision of the story as one of sincere and reciprocal love, which is not great. Either way, this is the image of Lolita that stayed with us. Cultural referencing of Lolita then doesn't reflect an interest in messy childhood nimbleness or unself-conscious nose-picking. Instead, it's an obsession with gaining the sexuality of womanhood with none of the troublesome markers of having to leave girlhood behind. A lot written about why this appeals to some men, but why do women seem to be buying into this? Girlhood, girl math, just a girl, coquette. What are these really if not a rejection of being a real adult? Millennials get a lot of hate for not wanting to adult today, but to me this is kind of the same. Of course, growing up is hard, but I feel like we're more obsessed with youth than ever, and online a lack of collagen is basically the same as a lack of good moral character. Lolita doesn't need baby Botox because, again, she's 12. I was on Rianne Teasdale's Instagram. She's the lead singer of Wet Leg. Her comments were going crazy because she had showed that she had underarm hair. People were horrified in the comments that she would not just have but show something that is part of the natural state of having an adult's body. I guess if you're seeing stuff like that online all the time, why would you want to have an adult's body? Lolita is a promise to young girls that they can always be sexy and sweet, wanted and obsessed over, eternally 16. Because the girl boss is dead and her pantsuit is outdated. We don't want to be the real grown-up. We want to imagine that a real grown-up is going to come and save us and sort all of this out for us. Lolita says you can be cute and beautiful and powerful because you are adored. And is there anything more fitting for the age of the influencer?